from Seven Rivers Brewing Co. Mr. Suraj Kumar. Oh, we have both.
Hi.
We have Mr. Suraj Kumar from Uru, and could we have Suraj Kandale from Mannheim Brews, please? Once again, repeating the Geisthat. Guys, we have your people representing the stage right now. Would really appreciate a show over here. It's going to be a great session. Thank you.
Check. Right. Welcome to one of the last few sessions of the day. We're going to talk about some do's and don'ts while making sure that your product is consistent in whatever form of brewing that you're doing. Now, seeing as this is quite a delayed session, it's after lunch, let's keep it short and interactive. We'll throw it straight to the panelists to get a sense of an experience that they have had where they have found some inconsistencies in the beer and how they have rectified that based on what they thought the problem was. So Ketan, we'll start with you.
Hey, so when talking about consistency or inconsistency in the brew, the major things to focus on as what as a brewer would like to do probably is maybe to focus on things like raw materials from the first go. Definitely that you would want to invest in raw materials that they are maintaining that consistency throughout. And then maybe when you start looking out towards the further processes, maybe it's towards the brewing process, then what kind of steps that you're taking? Are you maintaining the consistency in the recipe? Or maybe are you looking towards the yeast health or the water chemistry and all that? So based on these things and all, you try to take a look at what exactly is the problem over here. You do a sensory panel or you do a maybe laboratory tests and all that. And then based on that, you make a decision that this is probably where the problem lies. And then when you try to rectify that situation. So,
Right. Glenn.
I guess for me, know your beer. I know that sounds really simple and really strange, but know your beer. Know what you want your beer to be at the very end, and make sure you're always getting there. Don't compromise at the end. Don't sit there and think, I'm not happy with this beer, but I'm going to send it out there to the world anyway and let them judge. If you're not happy with a beer as a brewer, how can the community and the public be happy with your beer either? So that's the first thing. I agree totally about ingredients. Know your ingredients as well. That's the most important. You can't bake a cake with rotten eggs. You need to make sure you know what you're using. Eat your grain. Every time you mill in, take a handful of grains and malt and eat it. Make sure that it's the same as it was the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that. Same with your hops. Smell your hops. Just because you used a hop a month ago and you wrapped it up with tape and put it back in your fridge, when you open that, it's not going to be the same. Don't be scared to throw out ingredients if you don't feel it's going to be the consistency and produce the quality of beer you're going. We look at ingredients as being expensive. It's a lot more expensive to use bad ingredients and release a beer and try and have to recall that beer later on or get bad publicity about that beer. Ingredients are cheap, bad publicity is expensive. So make sure fresh, quality at the beginning and you'll get fresh and quality at the end.
Right. Suraj, please.
Yeah, so for the consistency and quality in beer, there are a lot of things like from the SOPs to like checking raw materials and a lot more things. But I would like to focus on just two things. So first is water, the RO water that we use because that's 90% of your product. So I think most of the brewers forget to check the water quality on the brewing days. So that has to be like in control. And second thing, which is the longest process in brewing, is the fermentation. So fermentation, whatever the 7 days or 10 days of fermentation, so most of the brewers, I think they don't take a sample from the fermenters every day. They think that fermentation is just started and when the bubbling will stop, that day will check the beer test. So I think that is where they miss the quality in the beers.
Right, Suraj.
So basically focus on your ingredients so at what temperature it's been stored. So to avoid any damages, prioritize around the cleaning process, follow the standard also SOPs to avoid any contamination or microbial infection throughout the brewing process, and pretty much control on the temperature throughout the process and avoid oxidation chances.
Right, so we've got a decent sense of what parameters to focus on when you're trying to maintain consistency. Now, seeing as this is a very general discussion, we won't leave the questions to the end. So in the middle, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, either about what they are saying, what they're discussing. We can ask questions as we go through the session. Don't save them till the end. All right. So now let me ask you gents a question. When you're trying to make a new beer, we spoke about using local ingredients. Now, it's not always easy for us to source quality local ingredients consistently. Now, if you want to provide the customer with something new, then what kind of processes do you have to start telling yourself? Because we know that in craft, a little bit of inconsistency sometimes goes a long way in providing a good product, but then at the end of the day, a customer wants to feel comfortable with what they're drinking, and they want to feel comfortable again the next week and the week after that. So when, in your experience, when you've made a new type of beer, specifically with fruits or herbs or other sugar sources or adjuncts, what kind of measures have you taken to ensure that that particular new ingredient is consistent enough? Anybody, yeah.
Cool. I'll take that. So, like you said, that when you start talking about craft beer in the first place, it's a balance between what you call as an experimentation and a science. So while you would want to focus too much towards your experimentation and putting out new and varied stuff out there, you want to create more and more stuff and out there, because you can never have too many beers out there. You can never have too many new variants out there. But all of them have to be grounded in a root. All of them have to be grounded by a root of science, which can definitely define your product. It can definitely define of what how consistent is that product and how how you're maintaining the quality in first place. So when we talk about the balance in between, we at one point we look to make stuff which are definitely there are defined styles out there. There are indefined styles. There's stuff which you think, okay, you slept on it and you come up, okay, this sounds something little. You start approaching beers from a seasonal point of view. Maybe you start beers towards some customer-centric point of view. You start, once you have your brewery running up and running, there's a lot of feedback that you receive from your customers. So there's a lot more factors when you start to incorporate, when you decide what kind of beer you're bringing in. But then there has to be a balance in between experimentation and science. While the style, when you start calling a style, like right now on Seven Rivers, there's a style called as a white stout over there. But why you want to call that a style, you don't want to keep that style as a white stout, there have to be some guidelines which needs to be followed. There has to be certain flavor notes, there has to be certain palate, some hops, the right type of hops that you have to use, which interact with the beer in a certain way which you'd want them. Like Glenn rightly said, the end product is what you're looking at. The end product has to be consistent, and to maintain that consistency while while raw materials keeps on changing, this is where the sensory, this is where the investment towards your brewing team, investment towards your equipment, investment towards your raw material, which cannot be emphasized enough. All of these comes into play. Suraj also talked about water chemistry before, and definitely that's a big part of the whole thing. While the processes, sanitation is a part of the whole thing, the major idea is to maintain that consistency throughout while you're looking at experimenting more and more towards the, towards new styles.
Right. So the rest of you, have you ever had an experience where you felt that the beer is deviating from its intended flavor profile? And if so, how did you correct it? So that'll help shed light for the young brewers on what kind of troubleshooting parameters to take.
Look, I'd say I've got a thing where I'll taste every beer in tank every morning. We've got all this fancy equipment we can use to test beer and stuff, but we're born with a nose and a mouth. They're the best two bits of equipment you've got in a brewery. So taste your beer every morning, and every morning you get, first thing, before you've had coffee, any of that, get in and taste every beer. You'll learn pretty quick and pretty soon whether a beer's on where you want it to be. If you are smelling or tasting something in a beer that you've consistently made that you do not think is right, do not try and save that beer. Don't chuck more hops in. Don't try and chuck more yeast in to get it to kick in now. It is cheaper to dump that beer there and then. Okay? Don't try and save a bad beer. You're not going to make a bad beer great. You may make a bad beer slightly less bad, but you're not going to make it great. So dump it there and then. So don't look at it, as I said earlier, don't look at it as the cost of that beer in tank. Look at how much that beer could cost you once you put it in cans or bottles or in kegs, logistics and all that. That's where all your cost comes from. It's a bad beer after day 3. It's going to be a bad beer in day 4, 5, 6 and 7. Don't try and save it.
Any specific incidents in your brewing careers where you felt that?
So, in my trials with beer with the fruit, like I made some beer with like jamun and grapes also. So anyway, for any kind of this new recipe, new beer style, so I do a small batch like a homebrew type, and I had this issue with like jamun fruit and grapefruits also, because most of the time you won't get the consistently ripened fruits. So even though homebrews I had a different results. So that time what I do is like I repeat the process like 2-3 times, that the same homebrew, until and unless I get the 90% correct result. Then and then only I go to the 5HL or 10HL, otherwise no.
Right. Anything to add? Do we have any questions so far from anyone in the audience? Somebody asked some question, yeah? No questions? Okay, yes. Can we have a mic there, please? Here.
Hello. Hi, my name is Mohit. My question is to Mr. Suraj. That you just mentioned that you experimented the brewing with jamun and grapes. So my question is, how do you decide the proportion of these fruits into your raw material? That this much percentage should be the fruits.
Okay, so that is totally an experiment. So I know at least for making beer, there should be at least more than 50% malt or like barley, whatever. So otherwise we can't call it beer. And second thing is like according to the fruit that we're using, how fruitful it is. Like let's say pineapple or mango, they are very fruity in the taste compared to like jamuns or like berry fruits. So anyway, I make a like basic experiment like with 20%, 30% of fruit or like total gravity compared to the grape juice or the fruit sugars. And when that experiment succeeded, I keep in some 5 to 10% difference that it in while making a bigger batch, it can be different by 5 to 10%. That is okay. So in case the results are not okay, then I might need to redo that experiment on small batch.
Thank you. So I have one more question.
Yeah.
So do you choose the yeast according to your recipe, or like is it you can choose any yeast for any other recipe? For example, for herbal, do you have any particular yeast, or for fruity, you have any particular yeast? As in some earlier presentation, we were having some specific products.
Anybody feel free to take this, Suraj. After you respond, anybody else wants to chime in, please do.
So most of the for this experimental brews, I choose neutral yeast because I wanted to get more out of that raw material or the fruit itself. So I choose neutral yeast, clean fermentation, and in case it's like let's say mostly fruit-based beers, I actually choose a wine yeast, which is like made for like used for making red and white wines. So that works very well for the like fruit beers. It can be a combination of neutral beer yeast plus wine yeast, and something like ciders or like maybe sour beers. Then that typical yeast strains are there that we have to use. But for experiments, I think mostly we should go with neutral yeast. Then it can be changed in like later on.
Thank you.
So one thing so of course, from Australia, our craft beer industry is probably going for a good 20 odd years now, and we actually have a festival in Australia called GABS, which is a great Australasian beer festival. Spectacular. So basically, breweries must produce a one-off beer where you can experiment with absolutely anything. And trust me, as brewers, we have experimented with everything. But the key when you experiment and go completely out there, you still need that quality base beer. So if you want to if you want to use an exotic fruit or a spice or something that you've never used before, still make sure that base beer is a quality style base beer. Let any ingredient you add to these just help that beer along a little bit further. Don't make it the dominant part of the beer. So again, you start at the beginning, good fresh ingredients, everything's good, and then you're adding this fruit or you're using a different yeast strain or something like that. So don't think of it the other way. Don't take this obscure new thing that you've never used and build the beer around that. Build a beer and add to it with something new that you've never used before.
Right. To that end then, okay, let's say I'm a young brewer, I've been thrown in the deep end and I have to source raw materials from different places. What considerations do I take into account when I'm sourcing malt? How do I know that the hops I'm getting, what parameters do I check from the supplier that this is all right? Same with the yeast. So briefly about malt, what should I look for when I'm buying the malt? What should I look for when I'm buying the hops? What should I look for when I'm buying the yeast, if anything?
Okay. So when you are looking to source materials or looking to source any raw ingredients for that matter, the first things that you have to consider is what are you aiming for? If you're aiming for a beer which is more fruity, then again you have to understand where the fruitiness comes from. If you're looking to make a certain spice note out there, you need to understand where the spice notes are even coming from. Are you adding an additional adjunct? Are you trying to derive that flavor from the yeast fermentation? Are you trying to, change the water chemistry around it? So all of these factors are into consideration. But when looking at raw materials instead, so when you talk about malt has a lot of sugars. Malt, we provide the same purpose to give, a sugar. The main idea is to extract sugar from the malts. So while your extraction is a big part of the whole thing, there are so many malts out there, so well modified at this point because we have excelled in technology. We've come a long way since what it used to be. We looked at very different parameters. You have so many malts out there. There's very different varieties like, you have biscuit malt, you have toffee malts, you have dark chocolates, you have Aurora, which you probably wouldn't have even, considered in times before. So when you're looking at the final product, you have to consider what you're looking to buy. So all of this depends on what exactly are you looking for. Similarly, when you look at hops, you're looking at a lot of what kind of alpha acid concentration is there. There's what is the beta concentration? What kind of biotransformation are we looking at? So they have to be a wholesome view. There has to be a holistic picture that what we're keeping in consideration before we move on to decide, let's go with this ingredient, let's go with that ingredient, what else?
So one thing I'd say is know your grower, know your distributor. If you're using, for us, Elsley hops, you contact us in Australia and say, I bought this hops from this distributor. Is that your distributor? Yes. I bought these, make sure you're buying the malt. Find out where you're buying your malt from. Make sure you're not buying your yeast through 3 or 4 different parties by the time it gets to you. Work out where your ingredients come from and contact those people. That way you know you're going to get fresh hops, fresh malt, fresh yeast. Don't be scared to ask the question. I said, don't just think that the person selling you something is selling it to you for the right reasons. They might just be trying to make some money. So contact the producers and you won't be steered strong. I said, for us from Elsley, from hop growers, we want you buying our hops that we know are fresh and the best. And that's going to be the same with every grower, every distributor, every producer. So keep that in mind.
So I will say for sourcing the raw material, first thing is who are the suppliers for that specific raw material. You should get that specification sheet, at least the basic data about that. Second thing is you have to finalize what beer styles you are making, whatever they are 5, 6. So the raw material should be suitable for the multiple beers. It's not just for one beer. And the third thing will be there should be always a replacement option for each raw material. You should not be dependent on the specific yeast, specific malt. In case that is not available, there is some issue with the transportation or availability, you should not stop the production or that style. So your raw material should match to at least 2-3 beer styles. So in case there is some issue for that week or that month, you can replace that with some other material for the instant, and it won't make your increase your inventory by like ordering separate raw material for each and every beer style. So that one thing can be taken care of.
Any questions? Yes. Where's the mic?
So this is not in regards to beer, but anything that we are fermenting. And I believe all the big companies have a proper setup to ferment things in a temperature controlled environment. What can smaller companies do where they do not have enough funds or let's say equipments for that matter, and they still want to have a consistent final product?
So essentially, what parameters you're checking, even on a smaller scale, just to make sure you're at par with bigger companies?
Flavors, alcohol percentage,
Right.
or like sugar quantity in the
Right.
final product, things like those.
Look, I guess the first things you need to do is, smaller breweries, we need to follow pretty strict SOP, so we need to know what we can test as easy as we can. So to me, it would start with basically, you need a cleaning SOP to start with. So you need to make sure that how you're cleaning everything is exactly the same every time, and checklists, not just for yourself, but for every staff, Then, again, it's your ingredient stuff, so make sure that you're dating everything. So if you do get a bag of hops and you open it in the beginning of March, that that when you know what day you open that bag of hops in case you use that bag of hops 6 months down the track. So you've got to keep all those sort of things. Things like, simple things are pH, alcohol content, your SGs and all that sort of stuff. They're probably the most easy things to keep a track of in a small brewery. And again, as a small brewery, it does come down to, like I said earlier, your sensory ability. Don't just taste beer yourself, and don't just give it to brewers. Get independent people in, or even get other brewers who you trust will give you feedback and truthful feedback. Don't be scared as brewers to get your ego hurt occasionally. You don't want to hear that your beer is great all the time if it's not. So get a group together, like here in Bangalore, you could quite easily get half a dozen brewers together to sit down and taste each other's beers and be purely honest with each other about what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong. That's probably the easiest way of doing it. We have a lot of breweries in Australia who send their beer into large beer competitions, not to win awards, but purely to get feedback from judges who have been judging for 10, 15 odd years. So if anyone in this room ever thinks they've made the perfect beer, you're kidding yourselves. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've still got so much to learn, and I've still never made the perfect beer. So just believe in yourself, get a group of people around, and just try and do the little things right. That's the easiest way of doing it.
So a little bit which I would like to add in this whole thing is, when you're in a small scale, you don't have a lot of cost control, or you don't have a lot of points to control. But whatever you have at this point, let's say you water, so you don't have to invest too much into it. Just go by the pH, go by the TDS. That's a very easy test you can get anywhere done. So just go for your water profile, the source water profile, get that tested out. It won't take long for you to do that. Once you have moved on to the stuff like he's talked about, the raw materials and all that, that is definitely a very, very crucial part about it. One thing which I would like to add on this is, make sure that you're doing enough data logging. The more data that you have on you, the better impact you'll have on as you go about it. The better the data you have, the more data provides you with more options at what you have done and what more you can possibly improve on, what more you can possibly, there's a potential to do in there, what more you can improve on. So this is a big factor. There's too many technologies out there which would help you not only just invest towards your data logging, or not only towards improving your beer health altogether. There's a lot more investment which you could do, small investments, like maybe invest in a sensory kit that would help you improvise your own panel, own palette altogether. So that helps you in small investments that will probably have a bigger impact when you actually produce that beer.
Right. Any other questions? Yes.
Hello, my name is Tejan. So earlier you have mentioned that to maintain the consistency, you need to like follow the recipe and maintain the temperature, right? So let's say I've done all of that. I've maintained the like temperature and follow the recipe. Does it give the 100% surety that it will like maintain the taste consistency like that? Or like there are like small chances of, like not maintaining that taste or consistency? Or if there is, what are the factors? Like,
Anybody, please.
Okay, so like you said, when you're talking about consistency, even if you follow the recipe down to the ground, and then you're expecting very similar results, the first thing which you would like to understand about this is what all factors are actually affecting your quality, what all factors are actually affecting your consistency. So while you're following the recipe to the ground, like we've talked about in this session altogether, what kind of raw material have you used? But have you done your water testing before? And the major thing is there is a sort of human error also involved in there. So have you invested enough on your human resources? Have they done that right sensory panel? Have they gone through the enough training to understand what is wrong here? And then after on, have you followed the sanitation practices right down to the right level? Have you maintained the caustic cycle? Have you maintained the acid cycle, then the sanitation cycle, so on and so forth? So there are multiple factors affecting a final product out there. It's not just thinking about and imagining about a final product and then just following down the recipe. There are too many external factors out there which you would definitely like to depend on. And while only giving, caring about these factors, while only maintaining that these external factors are in the right level, then can you think about, maintaining the consistency or you following the right recipe so that you can expect a very close product. Even then, can you expect around a 95% to 99% of a result? But that again, there's a human error also involved in there. So then that's why the human resource development is a very, very crucial part, to my opinion.
Anything else to add? Covered all? Yeah.
See, beer brewing is actually a very easy process. There is nothing like rocket science, but it's okay to have a like little bit of differences. Like let's say you are assuming a 6% alcohol in the beer and it becomes 6.5, or pH of you consider like targeted 4.3 and it becomes 4.1. That is still okay. The main thing to control is like standardize the recipe. So you have to study a lot before you do any practical work. So that is you will be very close to the result. And second thing is like that the process should be like very hygienic. So that also involves that cleaning and like choosing right raw materials and all. But it's okay to have a slight changes, but the taste and the selecting the best recipe, that is the main important thing.
Yes.
So talking about the consistency, one of the major factor I believe is the quality of water, the source of water. And sometimes, when the source of water is not right, so there might be a little more towards the alkaline side or towards the acidic side. So how do you maintain the pH on the both ways, whether little alkaline or a little acidic?
Just briefly, we don't have too much time.
So controlling the pH or alkalinity of the water is very easy. So in your water treatment plant or RO plant, you will have this water dosing systems where you can add some acid or alkaline solution. There is a dosage you can control on the small dosing pump. It will just make your pH in that range. There are like ppm speed control on the pump, like a feeder pump. So there you can control. And second thing is like in your RO also there will be a pH reduction and hardness reduction. Then if you have a softener, there also the most of the hardness will come out. So you just need to control that in a good condition. Every week maybe need to check. So that's very easy actually.
Anybody else? No? All right. So this then brings us to the end of the session. I hope that everyone who's come and heard these guys discuss something has learned one or the other thing about how to maintain a consistent batch of beer. But if there's nothing else you take away from this, as Glenn very poignantly said, don't be afraid to throw a bad batch of beer away, because that'll cost you a lot more. Anyway, let's thank Ketan, Glenn, Suraj and Suraj for being part of the panel and shedding some light on the do's and don'ts of maintaining consistency. Thank you everybody for participating. I will leave you guys to go to the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all the panelists, for sharing their valuable insights with us. The second panel discussion is preparing a business plan to start your microbrewery, brew pub, and tap room.